As humans, we've always dreamed of immortality. After all, it is the status of the gods. However, it's often more of a curse than it lets on. Five Pebbles, a massive superstructure in the video game Rainworld, works strangely well under the lens of Erik Erickson's 8 stages of psychosocial development, moral dilemmas, self-efficacy, self-esteem, and biosocial characteristics. I chose to talk about Five Pebbles because not only do we know most of his life, but he's quite an interesting specimen to study in this context. Studying Five Pebbles through the lens of Erik Erickson will show that even beings of abnormal lifespans can be examined this way. Now, before we talk about Pebbles' emotional development, a speedrun of Rainworld lore to bring you up to speed. So, Rainworld operates off something akin to a Buddhist philosophy, in that all living beings reside in a cycle of rebirth. Then there's these ancients, with the human stand-ins for this world. They're aware of the cycle, and most of their society wants a way out through ascension. Luckily for them, they discovered void fluid, a liquid found deep underground that not only acts as a great source of power, but can also ascend someone instantly. Now that they can ascend, they want to help the lower creatures of the world do the same. Now, these ancients are super advanced, so they built iterators, massive sentient supercomputers, to find a method of ascension that is portable and generally applicable through current technological means. However, they also use vast amounts of water to run, or else their systems would overheat. This caused an extreme release of vapor into the atmosphere, creating constant and torrential rains. This forced the ancients to live on top of the iterators themselves, as they were built to be taller than the clouds, creating a symbiotic relationship. Now, onto the stages. A supercomputer obviously doesn't experience youth stages in the same way we do. However, its beginning stages of life can still fit very well into Erickson's first stages. Throughout his entire time with the ancients, Pebbles' very existence was a point of contention. The first stage of Erickson's theory is trust versus mistrust, and it's decided in the first 18 months of one's existence. As stated by Cooper P. in the iBook, infants learn whether they can trust others if their primary caregivers are consistently responsive to their needs. Pebbles was not the first iterator in his area. Looks to the Moon, one of the first iterators, was built less than a mile away from Pebbles. Given how early Moon's design was, she was very unsustainable and eventually used up most of her water. To remedy this, Pebbles was built as a new home for those living on Moon. However, it was to be built on top of an old religious site, completely shrouding it in darkness. This gained Pebbles the alias Apostate Superstructure Abomination. While Pebbles himself claims he didn't find their actions displeasing, that vehement rejection from one's creators brings about feelings of mistrust nonetheless, and the way Pebbles behaves in the future only reinforces how much of an impact that feeling might have had. As Pebbles began theorizing about the great problem, he and his ancients tended to have differing thoughts on the matter. The second stage, autonomy versus shame, is where an individual develops a sense of independence in his tasks, and occurs from ages 1 to 3 years. As Pebbles theorized, he would present his theories to his ancients, and as stated by Moon a moment ago, they didn't believe the theories held much merit, despite Moon, Pebbles' equal, believing otherwise. This hurt Pebbles' own perception of himself, as the constant disapproval from his creators led him to doubt himself and his ideas. Unfortunately, information at this point in time is too scarce to come to any proper conclusions. While it is possible to assume that Pebbles experienced initiative rather than guilt, we cannot say for certain. The third stage, initiative versus guilt, usually develops between the ages of 5 and 3. Within this stage, the individual begins taking initiative on certain tasks. Unfortunately, as stated earlier, there is very little information regarding this time period. Therefore, it is irresponsible to assume that Pebbles experienced either side of this stage. This stage also has very little information. Erickson's fourth stage, industry versus inferiority, occurring between ages 7 and 11, is when an individual develops their sense of competence in their abilities, either fitting in with their peers or feeling inferior to them, depending on their performance. Once again, too few pieces of information exist that could possibly align with this time period for certain. While we could assume that Pebbles experienced competency, given his track record, we will maintain our factual standpoint and refrain from these assumptions. With the period of uncertainty out of the way, the second half of the stages have far more clarity. This next period was hard for all the iterators. For whatever reason, the ancients gave up, and began a forced global ascension of their entire species, leaving the iterators to solve the great problem on their own. However, what is about to happen is far more important to Pebbles than the disappearance of his creators could have ever been. One of Pebbles' most important moments of his life was Sliver's death. Erickson's fifth stage, identity versus role confusion, is when one finds their purpose in life, as well as who they really are as a person. This occurs between the ages of 12 and 18. When the age descended, many of the iterators lost true purpose, as even if they found a solution to the problem, the wildlife had no use for it, and the next civilization would come long after their own decay. While you'd think this would get the iterators to give up, they cannot. They were programmed with self-destruction taboo built deep within their core, as the ancients wanted to ensure that they found a solution by tying their own way of immortality to it. When Sliver of Straw died, it was life-changing proof that their kind can ascend. Pebbles is one of the local iterators that became Sliverists, or supporters of circumventing this taboo. This came from a new purpose in life, as he had a goal. He knew it was achievable, despite its insurmountable appearance. Unfortunately for Pebbles, his Sliverist experiment didn't go as he would have planned. Erickson's sixth stage, intimacy versus isolation, is when one finds intimacy and success in their relationships and occurs between the ages of 19 and 29. At some point, Seven Red Suns, a nearby iterator, gave Pebbles information on a method that could help him break his taboo. But he wasn't in the right state of mind at the time. He tried to rush the process, believing it was taking too long, and it would have worked if it wasn't for Moon. The speed at which Pebbles was advancing his experiment caused an overconsumption of their shared groundwater, starving Moon in the process and putting her in the dark about his intentions. As to not die, Moon used her seniority privileges to stop Pebbles' overconsumption, but this ruined everything for Pebbles. Instead of altering the taboo, he created the rot, something very similar to robot cancer. As a result of this, Pebbles refused to speak with anyone and buried himself in his work, trying desperately to find a way to kill the rot. Our last time period features the most information, as it's when most of the game takes place, showing the latter half of Pebbles' struggle against the rot. As Pebbles entered the latter half of his life, he closed himself off from the rest of the world. Erickson's seventh stage, generativity versus stagnation, occurs between ages 30 and 64, and is when an individual has lived their life and now seeks to give back to society. Pebbles spent nearly all of his time researching a way to deal with the rot. Any contact he's had during this period was with semi-sentient wildlife, which he quickly urged out upon their first few visits and would kill them if they entered after that. Given what little patience Pebbles has during this period, he very much fits into the stagnation half of this stage. Unfortunately, Pebbles succumbs to the rot, and at last realizes what he's done. Erickson's eighth and final stage, ego integrity versus despair, occurs past age 65 and is when one reflects on their life and all they've accomplished. Pebbles couldn't fight the rot, but thanks to the help of this wet mouse, he gave one of his last power cells to Moon. It doesn't make up for what he did way back when, but they both forgave each other long ago, and, for as long as Pebbles still stands, they have each other for company. Despite his last act being noble, Pebbles regrets nearly every decision he's made in the latter half of his life, squarely placing him in the despair category of the 8th stage. In time, Pebbles collapses, and an ice age overtakes the planet, leaving him alone in a tundra with what little memories remain. Pebbles made many drastic choices in his life, but what influenced him to make those hard choices to begin with? Well, Pebbles has encountered many moral dilemmas in his life. One of them was far more important than any other. Moral dilemmas are any difficult situations that involve transgressing of a moral principle, but once again, as referenced by Cooper P. in the iBook, morality is a fluid construct, and different things will count as dilemmas for different people. For Pebbles, his most difficult dilemma was choosing to starve Moon of water. Destroying a fellow iterator is obviously a massive decision, but Pebbles knew that his method was faster and would work, and once the rot appeared, his top priority was fleshing it out as fast as possible, regardless of how it would affect Moon. Overall, Pebbles seems to have chosen the self-serving option, as in his eyes, it was the only way to accomplish what needed to be done. Pebbles and his mentor, Seven Red Suns, despite being close at one point, fell out when his experiment started hurting Moon. Mentors are guiding figures that teach an individual about life and how it should be lived. Suns, Pebbles' mentor, is the iterator responsible for teaching Pebbles about the Sliverist group and giving his life purpose again. He's also the one that gave Pebbles the instructions on the removal of the self-destruction taboo. Unfortunately, Pebbles wasn't in the right state of mind at the time, causing a falling out between the two of them after Pebbles' misuse of the information. Pebbles took his self-worth in tandem with his ability to solve the great problem, as that's what he put his whole life towards. In reference to Liam M. in the iBook, self-efficacy pertains to one's confidence in their ability to perform a task, while self-esteem refers to your overall self-worth. For Pebbles, as well as most other iterators, the only task that matters is solving the great problem, meaning that their self-esteem was tied with how efficacious they were at solving it. Obviously, none of them, by and large, managed to solve it, meaning that most iterators, including Pebbles, experienced a constant lowering of both esteem and efficacy as more time passed and their state of decay increased. The iterator's biosocial characteristics are far different from most life forms. Biosocial characteristics are biologically determined personality traits that develop as reactions to the environmental stimuli around them. Pebbles is built to solve the great problem of global ascension for its creators, but once they left, it seemed pointless to continue. As such, their entire life and culture was centered around solving that one pointless and impossible problem. Pebbles made many poor decisions in his life, and brought pain to not only those around him, but himself. Rainworld is full of tragedies, but Pebbles is possibly the greatest. We can only hope that one day he finds peace.